if you meet somebody for the first time, say at a party, informal, and you start talking to them, what attitudes or behavior or characteristics would point you in the direction of beginning to think that that person is probably a critical thinker?
Okay, so difficult question. You know, I will do it the other way around and say when I meet somebody and they are very opinionated and they really think they know exactly what they're talking about, I'm often a little bit suspicious. Because if you're not critical or doubtful about the facts or the argument, if you are too certain, I'm already worrying, have you really thought this through? Because often people repeat what they've heard from other people. And they repeat also things that are not true, facts, so-called facts that are not facts because it's not true, but they heard it from somebody. And then, it doesn't really bode well for that person. The second thing is also what most of us find very difficult, I think, is to separate our personal identity, our commitments we have because of our language, our race, or gender, whatever, and our politics, to separate that from actually thinking about the problem. So if you're a lawyer, for example, something happens. So in my heart, I want X to win the court case. But if I just go that way, I'm not thinking. So what I really need to do, I have to say, okay, I know that I really want Mr. X to win, but I must first go and check what does the law actually say. I must try and remember that I mustn't let my emotions come in, and then I must see where it takes me. If people do that in some way in their area of expertise, or just about talking about who's going to win the rugby.
We know who we'd like to win.
Yes, yeah. So that then I would know. So it's often when people come with a position or opinion or whatever that is not necessarily predictable given who they are as a person.
Thank you very much. That is very interesting. So to sum it up, basically, if they are too sure of themselves and their opinions, and if you sense that they are very emotionally invested in their identity,
yes,
as well. So this is perhaps, and please feel comfortable to skip this question, but because our organization is focused on trying to teach the concept of critical thinking skills, which in my experience, people are not familiar with the concept, firstly, and it is sort of seen as something that academics do. Critical thinking skills as a subject is, I think, only taught in philosophy departments as far as I know. Do you think, well, I think it's important that everybody should know the basics. Knowing what you know about life and about the world and about people. Do you agree with me that it's important? And do you think it can be done?
Yes and yes.
That's easy.
Yeah. Of course it's important because, we're going through the world, and one of the things, I'm now a constitutional lawyer, so I think about the values that are in the Constitution, and one of them is dignity. The right to dignity. And one of the ways we understand that is you have dignity when you have agency, when you can make real decisions about your life that can make you flourish. Those decisions, I think, are often impoverished, are not good decisions when they are not informed by some kind of critical process. Because agency means you must actually make the decision. You mustn't let other people make the decisions for you. And if you're not a critical thinker, you're going to just go with the sort of common sense or what other people say or whatever the case might be.
Or perhaps become a victim of groupthink?
Yes. Or you're going to, there's also peer pressure, of course. You're going to be pressurized into just going along with something that is not good for you, is not good for the people around you, for your community.
That's very interesting what you said about dignity comes with agency.
Yeah.
And I think the things that we are experiencing at the moment with violence against women and the xenophobic attacks, that is, on the one hand, people perhaps taking agency in a way without thinking about it, because they feel that they don't have dignity.
In the country we live in, if you want to really understand other people and get along, you need to know about race and gender and sexual orientation. You know, people often make statements about racism and discrimination, or about women and how women are treated and patriarchy, or about homosexuality, but they really don't know anything about what does it actually mean and how does it work. So I think with my students we always say, you have to do the work. So the woman will tell the men, you have to do the work about feminism and patriarchy, because otherwise you're not going to get it.
Yes.
So for me, those are already three then.
Yes.
I think that's
all right,
important.
I'll give you three. I'll make those three.
And then, it's difficult to identify something specific.
Maybe news stories, can you, except for the violence against women and the
Yes,
xenophobic attacks, because I mean those are obviously now in the news.
It's difficult. I think it would be, maybe it would be helpful for people to know, maybe it's just because where I'm coming from with my area of expertise, to know how Parliament works, what happens in Parliament. Now these days it used to be a bit boring, now it's a little bit more interesting. Yeah, people are fighting in Parliament, because Parliament is the most powerful, on paper at least, the most powerful body in the country. So that's important. And then, I don't know, there are so many stories. It's very difficult
when the Rugby World Cup starts?
Yes, then you see, then you'll change the story, so I can't really think of anything specific.
Well, maybe something will, but
yeah.
Thank you, that is already something very interesting.
The greatest challenge is obviously poverty and inequality. Must be. We live in a country where rich people are very rich and poor people are very poor, and it's often based on your race, and many people are unemployed. It's very difficult to have a functioning country if people don't have food to eat. So for me that is by far the most important issue.
So would you agree with me that underlying poverty is maybe economic growth? But then again, economic growth does not necessarily equal a reduction in poverty.
It could be growth only for rich people. So yeah, it's necessary, but it's a precondition, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee.
That's right, yes. It's more complicated than
yes, yeah. So
poverty.
Corruption is a big problem, because you see, if corruption destroys the system that is supposed to allow for governance and for the government to work and to give services and whatever. It's kind of theft from especially poor people. So corruption, I think, is a big thing.
You know, something that's interesting, in one of our sessions with the learners, we start off by talking about how our brains simply find it very difficult to understand, to really grasp large numbers.
Yeah.
Because we try to make our courses practical, and my father used to be a math teacher, so he's the maths guy, and he uses this example. He says, if I gave you 1 million rand and you were to spend 100 rand a day, do you have any idea how long it would take you to spend that 1 million? I mean, do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
We actually did the calculation in class with the kids, and we said, it's almost, well, more than 26 point something. So it would actually, at 100 Rand a day, it would take you 26 years to spend 1 million Rand. And when we were discussing this, we said, one of the kids spontaneously said, but 1 million Rand is a lot of money. So why is there so much corruption? Because the people involved in corruption are not poor. So why do they steal? Which is a very you know, on the one hand you have very poor people to whom 100 Rand a day would be a fortune, but the people involved in corruption, they work in sometimes billions of rands. So it's very interesting that these two challenges, poverty and corruption, and would you agree with me that once again we get to the point where we have to realize how our human brains work? Because my answer to the student was, I said, I think one of the reasons why rich people are often corrupt is because they simply don't have a proper grasp for the numbers. 5 million Rand to them is just, it's just, that's something to think about.
Yes.
It's just,
for me, the interesting thing is, I don't know really why people do it, but for me the interesting thing is that I think also it's not only the numbers, it's also that it is difficult to translate a concept that is quite abstract, corruption, to your own life. So, you know, every time some politician or some businessman steals money, it's difficult to see that that person is actually stealing from you.
Yes.
Because that government department is supposed to build the road, you're walking on the road or driving on the road, now there's a pothole. But it's difficult to make that link.
To make the connection.
So I think one of the tricks I think always when I think about things is to think, okay, but what does that now mean practically on a very practical level? Because if you talk about more general principles or whatever, you talk about democracy, whatever. What does it mean now? Why do I want democracy? Does it work for me? Why? If the politician doesn't do what I voted for, what does that mean for me?
Do you think there is a danger in our society where we that words like democracy, corruption, poverty, they just become words?
Yes. Yes.
And we don't get down, we don't really think what are the implications in real life.
Yes, so you have to think that they become slogans in a way.
Yes.
And so if you have a slogan, then you don't have to worry about, okay, what does it now mean? How do we understand this? How does it affect people?
Sorry.
Yeah. And
That
so,
is very...
and to do that, yeah, it helps to make it, to bring it down and think about even your own life and how is this going to affect me personally? Why?
It would be fantastic if you could visit us in Worcester and see one of our classes, because one of the things one of the goals that I've set in my curriculum that I've developed is to take these concepts and think them through to the practical level. And that brings me back to why I asked that question. Is it possible to teach the Bargi who sleeps in the park to become a critical thinker? And I think that what you just said about making a concept like poverty or corruption, to break it down and to find the connections in real life where corruption results in a pothole that is not repaired.
That's correct.
Okay. If you could get 10 million Rand today to spend on social development, and you could physically put the money somewhere, where would you put it and how would you spend it?
10 million is a lot of money, but not a lot of money at
depends
all.
On who you are.
You see, I would probably spend it in some way on education. Because, well, as I said earlier, I'm very much into people must take the power. And so education is something that you're not putting, it's not charity, you're not putting a band-aid on things. You're making the person, you're giving that person the power to determine their own future. So education...
You give it to us.
Yeah, or for somebody who helps other people with education. But I don't know how, what would be the best. You see, first you'll have to go do the research, and then you will decide.
That is very interesting, and I, being an educator,
Yeah.
I agree with you that it needs to go into education.
Yeah. Yes, so the big trick is is to get the facts right and to get all the facts.
Yes,
Yeah.
and in detail. In detail. We actually had the situation in one of our classes, and I was, maybe you can ask me what my response was after you've given your response. So I was handing out, we were doing an activity, and part of the activity was each learner got a little slip of words, but it was folded close, and I told her, I said, don't unfold the paper before I've completed the instruction. And then one of the boys opened the paper, which is, I interpreted it as he's curious and he wasn't listening.
Yeah.
It's just a normal thing. And I said, no, don't. And one of the other boys said, that's typical black. And then another boy said, that's racist. Now the interesting thing to me was that every single learner in the class was black.
Yeah.
That was the first interesting thing. The second interesting thing was, the immediate response was, that's typical black. And then the final response was, that's racist. And I was just thinking, that's just how our country has been programmed. How would you, if you were in that classroom, what would your response have been? How would you have, what would you have done?
Yeah, so I would ask first the student, the learner who said that's typical black. So on what basis is that assessment made? How do you know what is typical black? What are the assumptions that you are relying on? Are these assumptions applying to every single person? Why would it apply to every single person? Because obviously it doesn't. This is what prejudice is all about. It is about making a generalization that is not based on fact. And so then try and teach the students that the enemy of critical thinking is generalization. So if you want to make a generalization, and often people don't even know that the generalization is based on all these assumptions that they've made, that they don't even speak, they don't say them, but it's sort of in their makeup. It's what they get in the society to tell people these things. And then, and then maybe the second thing is there's a very interesting question, because some people say if you're black, you are the group that are subject to marginalization. So if you're black and you are critical of another black person, that cannot be racist.
That cannot be racist,
And so then to discuss that and say, what is the answer? And sometimes the interesting thing with those is, I like it when people have different opinions, and sometimes it's not so clear what the answer is. It might, and that's also fine. Not to know is also fine.
I think that's one of the key attitudes in critical thinking. To get comfortable with not having the answer.
Yes. Yeah.
I think but that's...
or to know that there are two answers and both of them seem to have some strength.
Yes.
But sometimes you don't know which one of them do you choose, and it's fine to say there are good things about this view, there are good things about that view. I'm not sure I'm completely with either one.
And to be comfortable with that as well. I was wondering about that though, because racism in our country is such a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
And as an educator, standing in front of a classroom with only black kids, being a white woman, being Afrikaans, there's my father, he's 70, and become, so the moment you hear the word racism, you sort of immediately sensitive, which I don't think is wrong per se. I think it's good to have that sensitivity, but I also think one shouldn't be afraid or nervous to have an honest
exactly.
respectful and open
Yeah.
discussion.
Yes, knowing,
about
you see,
it.
if once you know that this is a sensitive topic, but also know that this is how race works, you can have the sensitive but honest discussion, because this is also the enemy of critical thinking, is to avoid talking about certain things because it makes you uncomfortable.
Yes.
Often I think most of the magic in thinking happens at that point where you are uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because it's sometimes when you are not in your comfort zone where you learn to think a little bit differently, or when you make a breakthrough in thinking about something.
And that's why we also, you said earlier, you said something about there has to be disagreement.
Yeah.
The most interesting conversations are those actually where, and the most learning takes place when we have something to discuss. If we are in complete agreement all of the time, and if we only seek out people that we are in agreement with, then we're going to stifle in our growth. Well, I'm going to stick to these questions. I would perhaps
maybe one thing from working maybe with people in other contexts, I think it's important to follow through, not to come in, do something and then leave people. It's good, you must come back.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It was wonderful to listen to you.
Okay.
I'm hoping we can perhaps visit you again, and if you could come and talk to the kids maybe someday, take a trip out to the prachtige Boland. It would be fantastic. Thank you very much.